Welcome back to part 2 of the Castle Forbes Revolt. Defence lawyer Roger Therry rises from his chair and addresses the court.
Gentlemen, reliable witnesses will now testify that in the Hunter Valley and the convict network, there was widespread fear of being assigned to Mr. Moody and his overseer son-in-law, Mr. Lanark. We must ask ourselves why these assigned servants of James Moody and others have chosen the mortal risks and extreme dangers of the Australian bush and their inevitable capture and punishment as preferable to life as assigned convict servants at Castle Forbes in particular and in our colony in general. Why would these men and so many others risk such an ignominious death? Many of us concerned Christians and those in favour of a humane justice system in the colony have been asking this question. In Britain, the hallowed home of our justice system, they have for some time been questioning the viability and humanity of transportation, prolonged servitude, and significantly, the unfettered control by some magistrates and settlers in this colony to punish. James Moody, and therefore Mr. Lanark, had been assigned slave labour of between 40 and 50 prisoners of the Crown to work at Castle Forbes.
Mr. Plunkett, for the prosecution, hastily rises to his feet.
Your Honour, I strongly object to the irrelevant line that Mr. Therry is taking here. The defence lawyer cannot accuse Mr. Moody, Mr. Lanark, or anyone else of wrongdoing, as they are not on trial here. This trial is restricted to the consideration of the crimes of stealing and the threat of murder, which these men clearly committed.
Judge Forbes replies.
You are correct, Mr. Plunkett, and you are duly advised, Mr. Therry, that reference to the accusations of maltreatment of convicts is ruled extraneous to this trial under British law. These men are accused of stealing, attempted murder, and occasioning grievous bodily harm.
Therry resists, having based his case on extenuating circumstances which had led to their revolt.
With due respect to the court, Your Honour, we have brought men as primary witnesses from Castle Forbes to this esteemed court to attest to the inhumane circumstances which directly contributed to the unsustainable situation of assigned convicts at Castle Forbes. They are prepared to risk their positions, indeed their very lives, to bring enlightened British justice here today.
Judge Forbes raises his voice.
You have been warned, Mr. Therry. You must restrict your comments and those of your witnesses to the case in hand. This case, being held here in the Supreme Court of New South Wales today, is to consider the events and the characters of your defendants who have been accused of serious crimes of theft and attempted murder.
Mr. Therry refocuses for the moment.
For a knowledge of the first prisoner, Anthony Hitchcock's general character, I call upon a gentleman in court whose testimony, I am sure, is, in its honesty, proudly above comparison with any of the witnesses who may have sworn against him. The gentleman I call is Ensign Zouch, one of the military jury, who has here already been sworn to the truth.
In a visually dramatic moment, Ensign Zouch, in formal uniform, crosses the floor to the witness podium from his position in the military jury. As a witness for the defence, who is a sworn member of the jury, this causes expressions of surprise and comments from the spectators. Mr. Therry allows a pause while those who did not know about the appearance and significance of Ensign Zouch acquaint themselves of the details. Of course, this was a military jury, which would not be influenced by such things, but British justice, in its colonial form, had to be done and seen to be done by the public. Mr. Therry then begins questioning the witness.
Ensign Zouch, you are a military officer. Please explain how you came to know the accused, Anthony Hitchcock.
The ensign paused, knowing what was at stake for him and the prisoners. He then begins.
Your Honour, I knew Anthony Hitchcock for about 6 months while he was employed in charge of the post office in Newcastle. My quarters were directly above the accused's. I know he had been several years in the colony and, having gained trust while in the employment of the Crown, he was placed in a situation of significant responsibility.
What can you say to this court to attest to his character, Ensign?
Asks Mr. Therry.
I knew him to be a quiet, well-behaved and trustworthy man, and one not likely to be guilty of such an outrage as that for which he is now on trial.
Yet he is here accused of a very serious crime,
Adds Mr. Therry.
Sir, I do believe that the unfortunate circumstance of his being assigned to the service of Major Moody, attributed to all of his subsequent misfortune and present unhappiness, He had been in the possession of an exemplary character before he went to Major Moody. He had since been repeatedly flogged, and by the unwholesome food he had subsisted on, his health had been ruined. Life itself was rendered burthensome. He was sentenced to an iron gang to which he was being marched, for an offence of which he knew nothing.
Hastily, Mr. Terry asks,
Now, Ensign, can you speak to the general conditions of assigned servants on Mr. Moody's farm?
Zooch replies,
The treatment that Hitchcock and the others received at Castle Forbes was harsh in the extreme. If they refused to labour on a Sunday, the biblical day of rest for the Catholics, flogging was threatened and as surely given. Also, servants who had for months been due for tickets of leave had been refused this indulgence without explanation, or accused of crimes of which they had no knowledge, and if they dared to press their case, a flogging was bestowed that ensured they would never ask again.
Quickly, the defence asks,
And had not Mr. Jones, one of the accused, written a letter to authorities begging for their intervention, a letter which was destroyed by his masters?
Again, the judge intervenes.
Desist. Do not answer, Ensign. You are now aware that any reference to the prior treatment of the accused is disallowed in this court. Be aware of the penalties of contravening the rules of this court before you compromise your position further. You are dismissed.
Ensign Zooch then leaves the witness stand, eyes lowered. Walking across the courtroom, he rejoins the other members of the military jury. Other witnesses attest to Hitchcock's good character, avoiding any comments on the conditions of the servants at Moody's farm or other estates. Mr. Terry closes the case for the defence. Chief Justice Forbes now brings the trial to a close by saying,
Before you are sentenced, you are all legally allowed to address the court directly, to explain your actions and why the sentence of death for these crimes should not be pronounced by this court.
Anthony Hitchcock steps forward in chains, his frame slightly bent from previous floggings. As Ensign Zooch and others had testified, Hitchcock had worked in managing the Newcastle post office for some years, and we may surmise that he was literate and more articulate than his companions. Addressing the court, he declares,
May it please your honour, I have laboured in this colony for 5 years and have faithfully served where required. I have been given a position of trust and responsibility. It is due to the circumstance of being assigned to the service of Major Moody that I attribute all my subsequent misfortune and present unhappiness. I was recognised as being in possession of an exemplary character before I went to Major Moody, yet I have suffered grievous hardships at Castle Forbes. The hunger, the arbitrary punishment, and the lash have left their marks upon me, and I cannot omit my concern for my fellows who remain there. We have been flogged without mercy, some of us not even told why. 50 lashes at his blasted triangles, while we were already weak from the miserable rations and unceasing hard work. Even on Sundays, that the Bible says is a day of rest. Moody and his lackey Lanark cared naught for the rules of God nor man. They made lame excuses for why a man who had worked hard, not caused trouble, and had served his time would not be given his ticket of leave to escape from that damned place and have a chance to make a living. And not only from Moody and Lanark. These men here on trial today, and those we represent, have come from other estates. Reed's Farm and Scott's, and Ogilvy's, and...
Before Hitchcock can continue, the judge warns him not to accuse or include others if he wants to exercise his legal right to respond before the court's pronouncement. The judge continues.
Mr. Hitchcock, given the seriousness of this legal sentence, that is an immediate death sentence for yourself and others, you have been given time to speak in this case. However, you may not continue your accusations. This solemn court is not a place for theatrics. Your previous circumstances are not considered relevant here under British law, and you will be restrained by court officials if you try to make this place a circus. Restrict yourself to what is directly pertinent to the serious crimes at hand. The question you face is as simple as black or white. Did you or did you not commit these crimes?
Anthony Hitchcock bowed from the physical effects of his former punishment, present chains, and perhaps with the hopelessness of his case, then stood as tall as he could.
Your Honour, I have no defence against the crime of being with a fellow convict who attempted to shoot in the direction of Overseer Lanark. As everyone can see, Mr. Lanark as well, and is with us today in court. We then took what we needed to survive, if only for the foreseeable future. For at least it was some kind of future. I can only beg the government to consider the treatment of us convicts at Mr. Moody's farm at Castle Forbes and at other estates.
What did he and the others have to lose, knowing that they were facing the death penalty? The deaths of other convicts and bushrangers before them had been, as they knew only too well, the result of this judicial system. Could the only remaining saving grace for their lives be to have on public record the everyday reality of their struggle against the present assignment system and its abuse, and a slight hope for change?
If the court would but look at our bare backs, you would see that we do not exaggerate,
says Hitchcock, as he and the others attempt to turn and reveal their scars. At the judge's nod, the court guards restrain Hitchcock and the others from removing their shirts and prevent them from speaking.
Silence. I said silence.
Shouts Judge Forbes, raising his voice from his place at the dark cedar podium above the court.
Your words attempt to slander the good names of landowners, free settlers, respected soldiers and magistrates of this government. You are attempting to overthrow the due process of the British legal system, which I am sworn to uphold. Your accusations of maltreatment are ruled extraneous to this trial. Let it be made clear, we are here sworn to uphold and maintain the tenets of British law, under which you are found to be lacking defence.
Managing to remain on his feet, Hitchcock implores.
We can show you, and these people, our proof and our reasons. Our scars can plead our cause without words. We can show you the scars from the torture that we received. This is why we escaped and did what we did. A bid for freedom, as short as it might well have been.
After Hitchcock's statements, he was forcibly returned to rejoin the line of the other accused prisoners. The judge then offers the same option to speak to the other men. Only John Poole responds.
Hitchcock speaks for all of us, Your Honour, though our scars speak more than any words or any of us can say. If these facts cannot be accepted in our defence, we are once again silenced by your unjust system.
He is then indeed physically silenced. The military jury then returns its judgment. In all seriousness and with the full weight of imperial authority, Judge Forbes begins to pronounce his final judgment on the men.
Anthony Hitchcock, John Poole, James Riley, John Perry, James Ryan, and David Jones. You have been, this day, tried and convicted by this court of shooting with intent to kill, in your own words, and of aiding and abetting in this grievous offence. The court has considered your words, and the law requires that such acts against life and property receive the utmost penalty. Anthony Hitchcock and John Poole. You will be returned to the place of your crimes at Castle Forbes in the Hunter Valley and hanged as a visible example to all that this behaviour will not be tolerated. James Riley, John Perry, James Ryan, and David Jones. You will be returned to Sydney Jail, which is the legally assigned place of your execution, and there hanged by the neck until you are dead, and then buried in unmarked graves. You are not martyrs to any legal cause. British justice has been served today. May Almighty God have mercy upon your souls.
According to an authoritative paper by David Andrew Roberts entitled Masters, Magistrates and the Management of Complaint, the 1833 Convict Revolt at Castle Forbes and the Failure of Local Governments, in the Journal of Australian Colonial History, published by the University of New England in 2021, we read that another 2 trials were subsequently conducted. The result being the same, except for the significant fact that one of the men, David Jones, was transported to the dreaded Norfolk Island for life. One report in the Sydney Monitor confirms that 2 convicts, Hitchcock and Poole, were thereafter taken to the Hunter Valley by armed guards. The site for their execution was on the very dirt track which bounds the side of Mr. Moody's estate at Castle Forbes, where one of the several attacks had taken place. The 2 were executed there on Saturday, the 21st of December, 1833, as a local, visible example to others. The convict indents provide the following regarding those 2 men who were hanged in the heat of the Hunter Valley in 1833. Anthony Hitchcock, the Melville, 1829, who had spoken at the first trial in December, was 41 years old from Essex in England. He was a bricklayer by trade and had previously worked in Newcastle in a position of trust, in charge of the post office, before being assigned to Moody and Lanark as a labourer. John Poole, Claudine, 1829, was a 22-year-old carpenter from Dublin, 5 foot 5.5 tall, with a ruddy freckled complexion, dark brown hair and blue eyes. He had been sentenced to transportation for life. Poole had been punished frequently under Moody's regime, although his character was described by some as well-behaved before certain incidents at Castle Forbes, perhaps as a result of which he had many scars on his face, back and legs. Anthony Poole was literate and had written a letter of complaint about ill treatment by Mr. Lanark, which was intercepted by him. The significance of the Castle Forbes trial for the Hunter Valley and the colony in general is summed up by Mark Dunn in the following way. It was a relatively minor event in itself, but it came to represent the climax of a decade of tension between immigrants, emancipists, landowners, and convicts in the Hunter Valley. Jane Wilson, writing about bushrangers in the Australian Dictionary of Biography, notes, Moody and Lanark were officially exonerated of ill treatment at a later inquiry, held to investigate claims which had been made at the convict's trial. Needless to say, the social and political disquiet continued in colonial society. The local and British press, ever more present and dramatic, spread news of increasing social divisions and troubles inherent in the transportation system and its implementation. Transportation's link to bushranging was also clear. In Britain, new philosophical ideas about punishment were emerging, favouring prisons over exile and rehabilitation over punishment. There was even the logical suspicion that crimes were being committed so that people could obtain a free passage to a land of opportunities unavailable to them in Britain. Eventually, the Australian colonies no longer needed convict labour due to economic growth. As a result, the British government's plans changed towards the active encouragement of free settlers to develop the colony. The government wanted skilled immigrants and investment, not prisoners, and feared that the transportation of felons discouraged respectable migration. A colony of unruly convicts and dangerous bushrangers did not attract settlers and their families. In New South Wales, transportation ended in 1840. In Tasmania or Van Diemen's Land, it ended in 1853. Transportation of convicts to all of Australia officially ceased in 1868.
The sentences of the Castle Forbes men were carried out quickly. Anthony Hitchcock and John Poole were taken back to the Hunter Valley and hanged beside the very estate from which their revolt had begun. Their deaths were intended as a warning, a visible reminder to every assigned servant in the district of the consequences of resistance. Whether their words in court stirred sympathy, outrage, or quiet reflection among those who heard them is impossible to know. But their testimony, however briefly allowed, left a rare record of convict voices challenging the system that controlled their lives. The Castle Forbes Revolt did not overturn that system. James Moody and his overseer John Lanark were later officially cleared of wrongdoing. The assignment system continued, and the lash remained a familiar instrument of discipline across the colony. Yet the trial exposed something that authorities struggled to silence: the deep tensions within a society built on forced labour, unequal power, and the constant threat of punishment. For the Hunter Valley, the events at Castle Forbes became one of the most striking confrontations between convicts and authority in the early years of the colony. It was a revolt born not of bushranging legend or adventure, but of injustice, suffering, and desperation. You've been listening to Bushrangers in the Hunter Valley on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.